Hello, this is Teresa and I'm back with another video tutorial for Dare to Be Artsy, and I'll show you how to put together this cute retirement card. And I'm using the Take Time stamp set from Dare to Be Artsy. I have my black ink, I have glue dots, I'm going to be using some scraps of paper from my craft room, a couple of circle dies, just plain circle dies, and I have a scallop die here that's 4 inches wide. And then I have a dark gray card base and another piece of gray cardstock that I'll be die cutting a few pieces out of. And I'm ready to go ahead. And oh yes, of course I have brads because I'll need one to make this interactive. So I first start by stamping the clock stamp several times on a piece of white cardstock, and if I don't stamp it very clear, I'm just going to keep stamping until I get good ones, because I want to cut out at least 4 of these, and I'm using a circle die that's large enough to cut those out. So I'll put these aside while I'm working on the next step. I'm taking the pale blue cardstock, which is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm putting it in the Misty. I already have my sentiment stamp in place in the door of the Misty, so I'm just going to ink up the sentiment and stamp that in the bottom corner there. And once I've done that, and I'm going to create a notch in the side of this piece of cardstock, and I'm using that larger circle die. So the size isn't critically important. You just want to make sure you have enough to make the opening fairly wide, like this. You wouldn't want a teeny tiny notch, in other words. And I'm going to be using the scallop die to cut this piece of red cardstock that I had sitting around in my craft room. And this is going to be my dial, so to speak, to spin the clock hands whenever I get that added. And then I'm going to put that all on top of this gray card base. And you'll see what I'm doing in a second, because I'm going to create the clock hands next. And now I'm cutting a tiny circle, which is about 3/4 of an inch across, and a triangle die that I have. You could hand cut these if you didn't have a shaped die like this, or use a punch perhaps for the circle. And what I want to do is cut, or trying to do, is cut a 1/4 inch strip off the end of that paper. So I was just guesstimating at what a 1/4 inch is, and it looks like I got pretty close. And what I want is 2 pieces. One of them needs to be 1 1/2 inches long, and then I'll need one that's 1 inch long, because I'm going to use that to create my clock hands. And as you probably guessed by now, I'm going to be using the little triangles at the end of each, or to put on the end of each one of these. So I'm just adding a dab of glue at the end of each of these, and I'm going to add the triangle on top and let those dry. And now I'm going to glue both the clock hands together at a 90-degree angle and put them aside until they're dry. Now I'm going to mark the center point in my red circle, scallop circle, and I'm basically just drawing a little X in the center point so that I know where to pierce that. And when I pierce through this, I'm also going to be piercing through the light blue cardstock piece at the same time. So I'm placing it roughly where I want it, how far I want it to stick out on that side. I'm going to turn it over, and as you can see, my mark is there, so I know where to pierce through the cardstock. And I'm going to need some tape to hold that together while I'm doing the piercing. So I put some tape there, and I have my little piercing tool, and I'm going to cut right through that mark I made in the center. So I'm just kind of putting a soft cloth here so I have something on the other side whenever I poke through that hole. And then once I get it started, I'm going to pick up the cardstock and press it in just to make sure that I've gotten it all the way through. And now that's ready for me to add the clock hands once I prepare those. And now I'm going to prepare the clock hands. Now that the glue is dry, I'm going to use my piercing tool and put a hole in where I join both ends together. And I'll press the tool through just to make sure I have gotten it all the way through, so I don't have any trouble getting the brad through that in a moment. And now I'm going to pull a brad out so I can put it through the base of the clock hands, and then I'll set those aside so I can decorate the rest of the front of the card before I put all of it together. And I will add glue and then find some places to put the clocks on. I did it in this order so that I could make sure that I had enough room for the sentiment. I didn't want to have to stamp that later or find that I glued the clocks on in a position that didn't leave me room to stamp the sentiment, so that's a good reason to do that part first. And part of my plan with this design is have a couple of the clocks at least sticking off the edge of it, and then I will be trimming off what is hanging off. And in one case, this die cut I happened to be holding had a flaw in the way it was die cut, and I think it's because I stamped too close to another clock. I can fix that mistake by just trimming it off of the edge of the card. And when I got to this last one, I was kind of debating where was that going to go, because I needed the space in the middle for the clock hands, and it didn't really fit anywhere else. So my solution was to go ahead and just put it off the edge more, as you see me doing right now. And now I'll just speed through cutting off the excess die cuts off the edges. And the next thing I need to do is attach my clock hands through the hole that I pierced through the cardstock earlier. And I fussed with that a little bit until I could get it in there. And once I do, I'm going to spread the prongs of the brad. Then I will secure them with tape. And the reason I'm doing that is I want the whole thing to move as a unit. As you can see now that I'm turning that circle, this is exactly what I was after. And to create some space to make sure that that piece of red cardstock can freely move is by adding some foam adhesive tape to the backside. And I want to do everything possible to avoid coming into contact with the moving part. And as I finished this up and added these smaller pieces to the side, I kept testing it to make sure that the wheel was moving freely. And in fact, I found that due to my placement of tape, there were a couple of places interfering with its movement, so I had to remove a couple of pieces and trim them so that I could get it moving freely again. So once I had that all taken care of, I'm going to remove the backer and attach this to the card base. I hope this simple mechanism I'm showing you gives you ideas for different ways you might be able to use it. I'm sure that you could come up with a lot of creative ideas. Here's the last step in my process to complete the card, and I'm just using a single glue dot, and I'm using that piece of gray cardstock that was die cut into a small circle. And once I have the glue dot there, I'm just going to cover the brad with that. And now I have a fun interactive card that really was not difficult at all to do. I thank you so much for watching, and I will throw up a couple of videos here on the screen for suggestions. See you next time.